you. So firstly, let me say it's a great pleasure to be here with you this morning. And as you've said, I'm already from the University of Bath, and I would just flag that I'm also the co-director of the Tobacco Control Research Group there at the University of Bath. So tobacco really is my bread and butter. And today I want to talk to you about the polluter pays levy scheme that we're proposing to address all of the issues that Sheila just introduced. Before I do that, though, I would like to make just a couple of declarations. Firstly, I would like to say that we have, and I have, no financial conflicts of interest. The Tobacco Control Research Group does not accept funding from tobacco companies or any other organisation that is not aligned with the improvement of public health. I would declare, though, that we do receive funding from Bloomberg Philanthropies as part of the Bloomberg Initiative to Reduce Tobacco Use. And I would also declare that I accept funding from Action on Smoking and Health, the version in London. And I would give a shout out to them because I've worked quite closely with that organisation in terms of the polluter pays levy idea that I'm going to talk about today. So I just wanted to flag up those funding sources. And then finally, I would flag that I own 10 shares in Imperial Brands, the tobacco company, purely for research purposes. So those shareholdings allow me to go to the annual general meeting and ask a few awkward questions. Any money we get in terms of dividends, etc., is donated to charity. So there's no financial benefit from owning those shares. They really are just to further my tobacco research. If you would like to know more about our funding policy, by all means, follow one of the two links I've put on my slides there, either to the Centre for 21st Century Public Health, which is part, or which the TCRG is part, or if you want to learn more about the particular projects that I mentioned, you can have a look at the list of projects there that I've included. Now, the starting point for my presentation this morning is really the point that sort of Sheila flagged in her introduction there. And that is the fact that in many ways, the UK is an internationally leading country when it comes to tobacco control. We have a whole host of measures that are world leading. And just yesterday, we had debates in the House of Lords about the tobacco and vapes bill, which will strengthen those existing rules even further by creating the generational ban for our youngest people and allow the tighter regulation of a whole host of products, including these newer nicotine products. The trouble we face, though, is even if that law is passed, as we all hope it will be, there are going to be millions of people who continue to use tobacco products every year, and those products cost thousands of lives lost and billions of pounds in both direct and indirect harm to the UK economy. So this really is a space where we can and should do more in order to protect everybody from the perils of tobacco and related products. Now, there are a number of particular problems that we can identify in the market, which is where the so-called polluter pays levy scheme idea would come in. And in particular, I think we can identify three problems that exist in the market at present. To start with, we operate in a market where we have very high tobacco taxation, and that is incredibly welcome because tobacco taxes are widely regarded as being the most effective measure, because tobacco taxes means higher prices in the shop, and higher prices in the shop means less tobacco use. The trouble is, even though we have these high tobacco taxes, the tobacco industry is very clever and is able to use various pricing strategies to undermine the impact of those high tobacco taxes. So when I looked about a month or so ago, you could walk into a shop and buy 20 factory-made cigarettes, and you could buy a very cheap economy brand costing about £12.40, or you could spend up to £18.80 if you wanted a very expensive sort of premium brand, if you like. And I've just put the euro equivalents there for any sort of European person who thinks in euros. Now, the point is that range of tobacco prices allows the industry to keep some tobacco within the affordability range of a far greater number of individuals, but also it allows the industry to earn a huge amount of profit by selling these life-threatening products. And unfortunately, they also pay very little taxation on those profits. So this pricing ability is really problematic because it keeps this range of prices in the shops, it keeps tobacco affordable and allows the industry to earn vast profits. Now that profitability should not be underestimated. Simply put, manufacturing tobacco products is tremendously profitable. I've got a figure from 2018 on my slide here that's a little old, a bit dated now, but it still illustrates very nicely the massive profit that can be earned by selling tobacco. And that is that the 6 largest cigarette manufacturers collectively made combined profits of 55 billion American dollars back in 2018. Now, that is a huge sum of money, $55 billion. To put that in context, that is more profit than was earned in that year by Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Nestle, Mondelez, FedEx, General Mills, Starbucks, Heineken, and Carlsberg collectively, who made a combined profit figure of 51 billion American dollars. Now, those companies were arbitrarily chosen because they operate in the so-called consumer staples section. But if you look at those companies, you can firstly see they are many household brands. You know, we all know Coca-Cola and Pepsi, etc. But most importantly, each of those products doesn't just make one product. They make a whole range of products. So Pepsi makes Walker's Crisps as well as Pepsi in the UK, for example. We know that Mondelez makes a variety of different products from Cadbury's chocolate to Cartnar coffee to Oreo cookies to a whole host of other brands that we know. And it's the same with General Mills. They own Old El Paso and Green Giant and Betty Crocker, things that we all have in our cupboards. So here, ultimately, we are dealing with a number of high-level international companies that own a range of brands that we all know, that we all probably have in our cupboards at home, and yet collectively they still earn less profits than cigarette manufacturers. The point I'm making here is that cigarettes are an incredibly profitable industry. It allows a large amount of profit to be made. And more than that, though, we know that cigarettes are incredibly profitable for each unit that is sold. So here I can tell you that Imperial Brands, the UK or long-time UK market leader, made net operating profit margins of 63.4% in the UK in 2023. So think of profit margins as being the slice of the money the industry gets that is profit. So what that means is for every £100 the company gets to keep in net revenue, so £100 it gets to keep having paid its tobacco taxes, £63.40 of that was pure operating profits. So in other words, most of the money they get is not the cost of doing business, it is simply the profits they make by selling those products. And we know Imperial Brands made profits of at least £371 million in the UK in 2023. Now, here I say at least, and that is because there's now some lack of clarity in the company accounts, because when we started to write about the profits that they were making, they remarkably started to offer less information. But the point is, we know they made at least £371 million, and that was just one of the companies in the UK market. So overall, we know the combined profits are going to be considerably more than that sum. Now, the point here is that these profit margins, the amount of profit they can make per sale, is so much bigger in tobacco than it is in other industries. So all of those comparator companies that I mentioned a few moments ago from 2018, they tended to make operating profit margins of around 15 to 16% on average. There was some variety, so it ranged from a low of 6.5% in the case of FedEx up to a high of almost 27% in the case of Coca-Cola. But the point is that is still comfortably less than half of the profits that are being made by Imperial Brands in tobacco. And the point is that those profits not only give the companies the incentive to keep engaging in the sale of these life-threatening products, but they get that ability because they have monopoly-like pricing power. because they can engage in that pricing behavior where they can have cheap products and expensive products. And it is therefore pricing power that is ultimately establishing why profits are so high in this sector. And we can see it's not hugely surprising because the two biggest tobacco companies in the UK market, Imperial and Japan Tobacco International, together account for 81% of the market for factory-made cigarettes in 2023. So we're dealing with a small number of companies that really control the market, and that gives them these vast profits. And those profits mean that they don't want to change anything because profits are as addictive as the tobacco products that are being sold by these companies. So we can immediately see there are two problems with the UK tobacco market. Firstly, there is this range of prices that exist and the huge profits the industry is earning because of those range of prices that are possible in the market. Finally, as we had noted at the very beginning, we know funding for all things related to tobacco control is in short supply. I'm sure the audience on the talk today knows this far more than I, but more money is desperately needed to help people quit this deadly habit, to help treat those who unfortunately suffer from the health-related problems caused by tobacco, and a whole host of other things as well, of course. So the polluter pays levy scheme is designed to address these 3 points. It is designed to address the pricing power of the industry in the market. It is designed to address the profitability of the industry in the market, and it is designed to raise more money that can be used for the purposes such as tobacco control, which would be fitting given where the profits are being earned from. Now, before I go through and explain what the polluter pays levy scheme would look like, I think it is important that we acknowledge that there are other policy options that exist and where these policy options may address one or more of those 3 issues that I've been just talking about. So we could, for example, talk about minimum unit pricing in the same way we have minimum unit pricing for alcohol in both Scotland and Wales. The trouble with that is that it only raises the minimum price in the marketplace, but it does not raise any additional taxation revenue because the benefit of the higher price would go to the industry rather than to society. And then secondly, it does nothing about the industry's ability to set prices above that level. So yes, it would be welcome versus doing nothing, but it's still not as good as the polluter pays levy scheme idea that I'm going to explain. And we could talk about other policy options such as minimum excise tax. We could talk about corporation tax surcharges in the way that oil companies and banks have to pay more tax, etc. But all of those come with a variety of costs and benefits, none of which I think are as compelling as the polluter pays levy scheme. And that's why we are suggesting this as the ideal policy we would like to see applied. Now, whenever we in the UK look at any particular marketplace where we think firms have monopoly-like pricing power and we worry about them earning too much profits, the government and we as a society tend to take action to regulate those prices to make sure companies are not able to rip off society, if you like. So in the case of water, we know that there is one water company that serves each of our homes. And so in Scotland, we have the Water Industry Commission for Scotland. In England, we have Ofwat that limits the prices that the individual companies can charge. We also have Ofgem that limits the prices that can be charged for gas and electricity. And every so often we see in the news that there is a new price cap agreed, and hence that's going to mean bills go up or down by a few pounds because of this changing price cap. The point is, in those industries, we are dealing with life-enhancing products, and we want lower prices to protect society. Here, we want the exact opposite. We are dealing with products that cause health problems to society, that cause a whole host of harms. So actually, we want to regulate prices to protect society from the pricing power of the industry. But we also have to recognize that if we have lower prices, that will also cause problems. So lower prices means less profit, but that in isolation cannot be the end of the story. So the scheme we are proposing for tobacco would actually be a two-part process. The first part is to cap the wholesale prices that tobacco manufacturers can charge in order to firstly address the huge profits that the industry is currently able to earn, but secondly would have massive wider health benefits by stopping the use of price. Price would no longer be a weapon for the industry because price would be set by a regulator rather than by the industry, and that price would affect all brands, whether they are premium brands or economy brands. So ultimately, the price cap would take away that key tool that the industry uses, that is the ability to set prices. To build on that, though, to make sure the price in the shops does not change, we need a second component, and that is where we need either an uplift in existing excise taxes or perhaps ideally a new health levy, a new tax that is hypothecated or allocated for health purposes, and that would offset any reduction in prices that would be created by the wholesale price cap being applied to the price that the tobacco manufacturers can charge. So in that sense, it's a relatively simple scheme. There are just these two elements. Number one, we cap the prices that can be charged. And then number two, we compensate for that with this health promotion levy. So in simple terms, I've got this diagram here to try and illustrate to you. So imagine each of these two bars that I'm showing in front of you represent the mean price of 20 factory-made cigarettes. Just so happened in the most recent month for which data was available, that was £16.60, and that was in January this year. And you can see that a lot of that price is made up of excise duty, the blue part of the bar, but there is a significant element, this gold section, which represents industry profits. What we are effectively suggesting is we capture some of those industry profits by the addition of this price cap and the new health levy. So it is about changing the distribution of price in order to make sure the industry pays more towards the deadly costs that they create to society. So that, in essence, is what the polluter pays levy scheme is about. Now, at this point, whenever I talk about the scheme, those who sort of follow this space carefully will perhaps remember that back in 2014, the coalition government that we had at the time did consult on the idea of a new tobacco levy on the tobacco manufacturers, but after the consultation decided against that idea. Now, that idea was essentially a backwards-looking version of existing excise taxes and was going to be something very similar to the US FDA user fees or the new cost recovery charges that have been brought in Canada. The problem with those is that they are still a tax based on the amount of tobacco that either importers or manufacturers are selling into the marketplace. And so we would expect them to treat those taxes in the same way that they treat existing taxes, and that is to pass them on to consumers in the form of higher retail prices. Now, while higher retail prices are of course welcome, the trouble is that it was worked out that the behavioral effects of those price rises would essentially offset any revenue to be gained by the levy, and so the government concluded it just wasn't worth it. It would be better off sticking with the more simple existing excise tax structure. Crucially, what we are proposing with the polluter pays levy scheme is entirely different to that. So yes, the use of the term levy is consistent, but the detail of the scheme is different, and it will overcome the particular problems that were identified in the previous consultation. So to start with, we are talking about a scheme that uses price caps, and that will by definition reduce the profit of the industry. And those price caps prevent the industry from passing on the costs of any new health promotion levy, because by definition, the prices will be set by a regulator rather than by the industry itself. Secondly, as we've already said, we need this new health promotion levy, this new increase in taxation to make sure the price in the shops does not go down. So again, we would raise more money by definition because we would be capturing more of the retail price in the form of taxation or tax plus this health promotion levy. Finally, our scheme is also going to be different because it would incentivize to manufacturers to move away from producing these products. I've put there make smoked tobacco obsolete in my slide, but really we should think of this as being the case that any product that was subject to the price cap would now be less attractive. The industry would be able to make less profits on any product that was subject to a price cap. And so part of the job of a regulator would be to work out what products should be included and what prices would be allowed for each and every product. So clearly a choice would have to be made there at a political level as to what to include. Whatever was included would be incentivized by dint of lower profits to be less popular with the industry. So how would this sort of scheme work in practice is a question that sort of would naturally follow from the broad outlines. And the scheme, as I've said, wouldn't be hugely complicated. The first stage would be to create a regulator to set and then periodically review the price caps that would apply to wholesale tobacco products. Now that could be done in a number of different ways. We could create a new independent regulator. We could call it Off-Smoke, as is UK tradition, that would be a new independent body designed just for this purpose. Or it could be the case we try to use existing measures. So the Department for Health and Social Care in London, for example, looks to set the price for prescription medicines. So it could be argued that they would have the expertise to monitor tobacco company profits and set appropriate price caps. That again is a political choice, but the point is we would need some body, some organization to act as industry regulator. That regulator would need to set what could be legally identified as being a fair price cap. And so we would suggest that could be based on the costs of production for tobacco products, plus a small uplift to allow for profit. Now, if we were to take 10% as a reasonable return, then that would allow hundreds of millions of pounds to be captured annually, given our discussion of Imperial Brands earlier. We saw that they made profits of 375-ish million pounds in 2023. They made profit margins of 60-something%. So reducing that to 10% would allow many millions of pounds to be captured through the polluter pays health promotion levy. Now, here I would stop for a moment and reiterate my point that we are talking about a price cap on the wholesale price of tobacco products. So in that regard, we could still allow distributors and retailers to make their current markups so that the industry could not be utilizing corner shops, etc., as a reason not to introduce this policy. And that is a deliberate choice. We know most of the profits in tobacco go to the manufacturers rather than the rest of the supply chain. So we are deliberately targeting that profit center and deliberately not targeting those other parts of the industry, which could be a concern to politicians. Now, when that regulator is setting the price caps, there would have to be choices made in terms of the speed and desired market impact of any price cap to be applied. And I'll give you a few sort of suggestions in a few minutes as to the sort of thing I'm talking about there. But in general terms, think of it in this way. We are talking about a scheme that would narrow the price range of tobacco products available, because factory-made cigarettes, whether they are an economy brand or a premium brand, cost very similar amounts to produce. So if you are limiting prices to basically production costs, what you are saying is cheap products and expensive products are basically going to be sold at the same price. So one of the challenges that we would have when we introduce the scheme is the speed at which we increase the price of the cheapest products. That's going to have to be mindful of the politics, But ultimately, that choice is about the spread of prices we can see in the market, and hence what happens to the mean price of tobacco over time. Ultimately, they are choices to be made. The destination would still be the same, and that is where we have this price cap and where we have this additional tax to make up the price in the shops. Now, I'm no lawyer. I don't know how sort of legislation gets drafted in sort of either Scotland or Westminster or Cardiff, for example. But I'm told by those who do that actually this isn't a particularly complicated idea because the UK has a long tradition of regulating industries. So in theory, we could have a very small change to primary legislation that could give the Secretary of State for Health pricing powers, and then that could then be extended to the tobacco industry with the details set out in secondary legislation. So the point is, we're not dealing with something that's incredibly complicated. One challenge, though, that is perhaps a complication is how could this policy be applied? Thus far, I've spoken on the assumption that this could be a UK-wide scheme, and I think that would certainly be the preferable option. To start with, we know that tobacco tax is a reserved matter for the UK government in Westminster, so it would save any complications as to whether we are dealing with a tax or not. And then, of course, we also know that people are free to move around the UK and shop in England and sort of go back to Scotland and vice versa. So having sort of one common policy across the UK would be helpful. And most importantly, I think from a public health point of view, we would be far better off targeting the UK as a whole to get, the whole population gain from the health benefits of this policy, rather than target just individual devolved administrations where the population is clearly smaller. That said, we do need to recognise that at the moment the UK government hasn't shown much interest in this scheme, and therefore perhaps we do need to think of other possible avenues for getting this policy across the line. And that is where I think it is very relevant to note that the polluter pays levy scheme that we are promoting has a mix of health and economic benefits. So here I would flag to you very recently the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. They have an expert group that looks at what they call forward-looking measures, or measures that will help sort of address the tobacco endgame. And they actually included what is basically the polluter pays levy scheme as part of their sort of recommended policy options for the future. So this is a policy with some international support. And because of that, I think we could identify and take advantage of the fact that health is a devolved matter for the administrations in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So here we know that alcohol minimum unit pricing has been applied in those jurisdictions, and that shows that price measures are possible when it comes to products that are health harming. So in that regard, if we were to promote the idea of the polluter pays levy scheme as being a health policy, perhaps it would be possible for the devolved administrations to apply it in their particular jurisdictions. Again, I'm not a legal expert, so I'll leave that for discussion another day, but it's certainly worthy of a conversation, I would suggest, and therefore this webinar, I think, is very relevant in that regard. Now, just to finish sort of the detail of the scheme, to sort of help illustrate the potential benefits of the scheme, I've sort of teamed up with the team at the University of Sheffield, who have created the Sheffield Tobacco and Alcohol Policy Model, and where that model has been used to explore the impact of minimum unit pricing of alcohol in Scotland. Now, we have used their version of the model for England simply because it is the closest proxy to the UK population as a whole. So it's the closest we could sort of model for a UK-wide application of this policy. But the point is that model is well developed. It aligns very nicely with the UK government's model for things like when tobacco duty changes, what we would expect to find. And that model basically seeks to explore the life course dynamics of a whole range of different people within the population to explore smoking patterns and how those consumers and how retailers would respond to price changes. So in other words, we've done some modeling of this policy and we've compared what would happen in a business as usual situation with what would happen if our price cap and polluter pays levy scheme was applied. So our business as usual scenario is where we continue the UK government's tobacco tax escalator of increasing tobacco by 2% in real terms, or in other words, inflation plus 2%. And here you can see I've got a table full of numbers which I'm not expecting you to understand, but I would draw your attention to a couple of really important things. Firstly, in that part of the table that I've just highlighted in red, this is where we are comparing what we would expect to happen in terms of tax revenue in various different scenarios that we modeled. And what you can hopefully see is that we basically model 6 different scenarios. We looked at what would happen if we had like a low, medium, and a hard price cap, so the extent to which we pushed prices down for the industry, and then we modeled those 3 with either immediate application or a phased-in approach. And what we found was that over a 5-year period, we could raise up to £4.9 billion in additional tax revenue if we go for the hardest price caps and if we applied that immediately. In all other scenarios, bar one, we would raise at least £1 billion in additional tax revenue. So we can see this as a policy that could raise considerable amounts of money. Most importantly, though, I think it's important to recognize that this money would be raised from the tobacco industry rather than from individual smokers. So that second box I flagged on my slide explores the mean spending by smoker, and that's the amount of money they would spend per week. And you can see in pretty much all scenarios, we are dealing with money that doesn't broadly change, and in most scenarios actually goes down slightly. So this is a policy that would not be paid off the back of smokers who are addicted to their deadly product. This would be money that would be raised from the tobacco industry itself, and therefore could be seen as being an additional policy to tobacco taxation rather than being a substitute for tobacco taxation. Final thing to note on our results is that there would be a whole host of wider benefits to be gained. So here you can see I've just highlighted a few numbers, and these show the number of deaths, the number of years of life lost, and the number of hospital admissions in all of those scenarios. And you can see in most of those situations, the numbers actually go down. Those numbers go down purely based on the changing price of tobacco in the shops. Those numbers do not account for any additional benefits that would be generated if the tax revenue was spent in a public health manner. So for example, we would expect more deaths to be averted if some of the money raised was used to fund tobacco cessation services and public advertising campaigns, etc. So here, our results show that there are both economic and health benefits and considerable benefits to be gained if this policy were to be applied. The final thing I would note in my presentation before I sort of invite some questions is that this is a popular policy. So here I very kindly got a slide from Hazel Cheeseman, the Ash CEO in London, and they have done a variety of sort of polling of the public to understand how popular this policy would be. And you can see overall there is a large amount of net support for this policy, irrespective of all voting intentions. So whether you're a Green Party voter, a Reform voter, an SNP voter, you can see the majority of the population support this. And indeed, for the electorate as a whole, you can see we have about 75% who support this policy. And so it has really good traction, I think, with the public. And that is true irrespective of whether you are dealing with a smoker, an ex-smoker, or someone who has never smoked. So this is a policy that is popular in the eyes of the public. This is a policy that would work from both a health and economic point of view. And this, I think, is a timely policy because it is a policy that would complement the hopefully forthcoming tobacco and vapes bill that is about protecting future individuals from the perils of tobacco and nicotine products. The polluter pays levy is very much about helping those who are already addicted to those products, as well as deterring those who may become addicted because of industry strategies.